The alien civilization was not like most others in the galaxy. They had bright, shimmering cities that floated above the ground, connected by transparent bridges and glimmering energy lines. Their technology was advanced in many ways. They could manipulate energy for transportation, communication, and even healing, but despite their brilliance, they were fragile in one crucial way. They were not prepared for war. Their galaxy, though beautiful, was not peaceful. Threats lurked in the dark corners of space, and one such threat had emerged on their doorstep. It started as small attacks. Scout ships would disappear without a trace, and isolated colonies reported. Strange, shadowy crafts raiding their supply stations. The aliens initially tried to reason with the attackers, sending diplomatic messages into space, hoping for a peaceful resolution, but diplomacy failed. The attackers, a brutal warlord species, were relentless. Their ships were heavily armored, equipped with weapons that could punch through the strongest of shields. For the aliens, it became clear that their defenses, though sophisticated, were not enough. Panic slowly began to spread among the population, especially on the planets closest to the warlord's territory. In the capital city, the leaders of the alien civilization held emergency meetings. Holographic maps flickered in the center of the council chamber, showing the trajectory of enemy fleets and the areas already under threat.
The council debated endlessly, weighing every possible strategy to fortify their planets, launch counterattacks, or evacuate their citizens.
Each option had risks, and time was running out. The attacks were accelerating, spreading faster than anyone had predicted. Every day without a solution meant more lives lost, more cities destroyed, and more fear consuming the population. Finally, a young officer, someone not yet part of the highest councils, but known for his sharp mind and innovative ideas, suggested a desperate measure. "We need help from beyond our galaxy," he said. "There must be someone out there strong enough to fight them. Someone who has survived worse than this. We can't do it alone." His words caused a stir. Asking for outside help was dangerous. Who knew what kind of attention it would attract? What if they called someone far worse than the attackers themselves? But the council was desperate. Their people were dying, and the threat was growing exponentially. There was no other choice. The decision was made to send a distress signal into deep space, a signal encoded with advanced technology and carrying every detail of their predicament. It was broadcast as a wide-open call, hoping that anyone would receive it and respond. The signal carried not only the technical coordinates of their planets, but also their history, their culture, and the nature of the threat they faced. It was a plea for salvation, sent into the vast emptiness, where the odds of someone responding seemed slim. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens of the alien world were beginning to feel the tension in ways the leaders could not always manage. Markets were quieter, streets less crowded, families clung to each other, and children stared up at the sky wondering if the shadows they saw moving between stars were friend or foe. Scientists worked tirelessly to enhance their own defenses, but deep down, they knew it was not enough. Even the bravest soldiers admitted that their strategies could only slow the invaders, not stop them. Hope, fragile as it was, became tied entirely to the mysterious signal they had sent. Unbeknownst to them, the signal traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. It pierced through the endless void of space, moving silently but purposefully. The signal did not carry any guarantee of safety or rescue. It only carried a desperate cry for help. And somewhere, light years away, it was noticed. It reached a system that had long been considered harsh and unforgiving, home to a species that had survived challenges beyond imagination. These were humans from a planet so hostile that their environment alone could kill most forms of life. They were known across the galaxy as Deathworlders. Their fleets, trained for survival and warfare on planets far deadlier than any alien world, were feared everywhere. The signal did not come as a request to negotiate, to trade, or to form alliances. It came as a call for protection, and the Deathworlders recognized the urgency immediately. The aliens had no idea what they were waking. To them, it was a blind hope, a gamble thrown into the infinite dark. They could not have imagined the power that would answer. All they knew was that the enemy was coming closer, that the skies were no longer safe, and that this call was their last, desperate chance to survive. The distress signal, small and seemingly fragile, was now their only weapon in a battle that could decide the fate of their civilization. Even as the signal moved across the stars, there were subtle signs on the alien planets that change was coming. Animals and plants reacted to strange cosmic vibrations. Sensors picked up anomalies in nearby space, and whispers of hope began to circulate among the people. Some could not explain it, but a sense of something immense was arriving, a presence beyond their comprehension. They could not see it yet, could not understand it, but the signal had already begun its work. It had cast a line into the infinite ocean of space, hoping to pull a savior from the depths. Time, however, was their enemy. Every moment the aliens waited was a moment their cities could be destroyed, their people harmed, and their hope shattered. Scouts reported enemy ships nearing the outer planets. Panic flared, but it was tempered by a quiet, shared understanding. They had done everything they could. The signal was out, and whatever responded would soon arrive. Their only choice now was to prepare, to endure, and to trust in the unknown. And so, life on the alien planets continued under a shadow of fear and anticipation. Citizens went about their routines. Soldiers trained for battles they could barely imagine, and leaders monitored the skies constantly. Every blinking light in the sensors could signal doom or salvation. Every strange movement in space was a reminder that the universe was vast, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Yet, amidst all this tension, a fragile thread of hope grew. It was small, invisible, and uncertain, but it was there. The belief that help was coming, that the signal had reached someone who could turn the tide, that the aliens' desperate gamble might not be in vain. And so, as night fell over the floating cities, with stars glittering like distant diamonds and the threat of annihilation looming ever closer, the alien civilization waited. They did not know who would respond, what form it would take, or if it would even arrive in time. They only knew that they had done the one thing they could. They had reached out into the vast, silent darkness, sending a plea across light years, praying that someone, somewhere, would hear it and come to their aid. The fate of their entire civilization now rested on that unknown, unseen force, and nothing would ever be the same again. The alien civilization's hope was a fragile thing, like a candle flickering in a storm. They had sent their distress signal into the depths of space, unsure if anyone would answer. Days passed, then weeks, and their anxiety grew. Reports of enemy fleets advancing became more frequent. Colonies reported sightings of dark, fast-moving ships at the edges of their solar system. Panic began to creep into everyday life. Streets that were once filled with laughter and energy now seemed quiet and tense. Children clung to their parents. A little tighter, elders whispered prayers, and even the bravest soldiers could not hide the worry in their eyes. Every day felt heavier than the last, and the shadow of fear seemed impossible to escape. Then, one day, the skies changed. It began subtly, almost like a ripple in the fabric of reality. Energy readings spiked across the planetary sensors. Unusual gravitational distortions were detected. Something was approaching, but it was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. At first, it was only a faint blip on the scanners, a distant presence moving faster than conventional spacecraft could travel. Scientists and military analysts scrambled to understand the anomaly. Some thought it might be another enemy fleet, a trick, or a new threat they had not anticipated. Fear surged again, stronger than before. Then, as the object drew closer, their terror was replaced by awe. Massive silhouettes appeared against the stars. The fleet that emerged was beyond anything the aliens could have imagined. Ships larger than their cities, bristling with weapons. Engines glowing with raw power, they seemed almost alive, as if the very essence of war had taken shape in metal and fire. The Deathworlders had arrived. Unlike anything in the aliens' history, these humans were not gentle explorers or negotiators. They were survivors, honed by generations on a planet so harsh that only the strongest could endure. Their fleets reflected this, ruthless, efficient, and terrifyingly precise. At first, the aliens were paralyzed with fear. They had called for help, yes, but they had no idea what form that help would take, and this was not what they expected. The The sheer scale of the fleet, the sharp angles of the battle cruisers, the silent hum of energy weapons charging it was overwhelming. Citizens stared at the skies, mouths open, unable to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. Scientists rushed to recalibrate their sensors, trying desperately to measure the power of these ships, to understand what they had brought into their galaxy. Military leaders convened emergency meetings, unsure how to communicate with these incomprehensible beings. Yet, despite the fear, there was a strange, almost magnetic sense of security that accompanied the fleet. The Deathworlders did not attack the aliens. They did not demand tribute, surrender, or obedience. Instead, their ships positioned themselves strategically, forming defensive perimeters around key cities and planetary systems. Communication signals, brief but clear, were sent. It was simple and direct. They were here to help. There was no diplomacy, no negotiation, no small talk. The aliens sensed an unyielding certainty in the humans, confidence born of experience, of survival in environments where failure meant extinction. As the days passed, the aliens began to observe the Deathworlders more closely. The ships were enormous, but their movements were precise and coordinated. Smaller attack craft patrolled the skies, scanning for threats, while colossal cruisers orbited above like guardians. Energy shields pulsed with a blue glow, deflecting cosmic debris and detecting potential enemies. The aliens, with all their advanced technology, had never seen such a combination of raw power and strategic genius. It was terrifying, yes, but it also sparked hope. For the first time in weeks, the citizens felt the possibility of survival, and even victory against the approaching warlords. There were moments of tension, of course. Some aliens still feared that the humans might turn against them, that calling for help could be a mistake. Rumors spread that the Deathworlders were unpredictable, that their wrath could destroy friend and foe alike. But every observation contradicted those fears. The humans moved with purpose, defending the alien cities, scanning the outer planets for signs of the enemy, and establishing clear lines of communication. It became apparent that these were not conquerors but protectors, albeit ones shaped by a brutal and unforgiving world. The aliens. Scientists began to study the humans' technology, fascinated by its complexity and efficiency. Ships could adapt to different atmospheres, resist extreme temperatures, fire weapons with pinpoint accuracy over vast distances. Their defenses were nearly impenetrable. The energy systems, while alien in design, followed a logic that even the aliens' most brilliant minds could admire, while understanding it fully was impossible. The mere observation taught them lessons in strategy, defense, and the true meaning of resilience. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens began to feel a subtle shift in their daily lives. Streets that had been tense now hummed with cautious optimism. Children watched the sky with awe rather than fear, and families whispered excitedly about the mysterious protectors who had appeared without warning. Soldiers felt their morale soar, bolstered by the presence of allies stronger than anything they could imagine. Even the leaders, who had been consumed by worry and doubt, found themselves planning for a future that was no longer solely about survival, but also about rebuilding, resistance, and eventual victory. The approaching threat of the warlord species had not diminished, but the presence of the Deathworlders changed everything. The aliens could now see a path forward, a way to defend themselves against what had seemed like an unstoppable force. Strategy meetings took on a new tone. Plans were refined to coordinate with the human fleet. Observation stations monitored both enemy movements and human fleet responses. For the first time, the aliens felt like participants in their own defense. Rather than helpless victims waiting for destruction as the enemy drew nearer, small skirmishes began on the outer edges of the alien systems. Scouts reported enemy ships testing the limits of the Deathworlders' fleet. Each encounter ended in disaster for the invaders. The humans, though few in number compared to the vast armies of the enemy, displayed a level of tactical brilliance that was unmatched. Ships moved in perfect formation, anticipating enemy maneuvers before they happened. Weapons fired with deadly accuracy, and the aliens watched in amazement as their would-be conquerors were destroyed with efficiency and skill. Through it all, the aliens learned a crucial lesson: calling for help was always a risk. But the right help could change everything. They had gambled, reaching out into the vast, unknown darkness of space. And their gamble had paid off in a way beyond their wildest dreams. The Deathworlders had arrived. Not just to fight, but to protect, to teach, and to inspire hope in a civilization that had been teetering on the brink of despair. By the time the enemy fleet approached the first major colony, the aliens were ready not because they had grown stronger overnight, but because the Deathworlders had arrived to turn fear into strategy, chaos into order. The skies of their worlds were no longer a place of terror, but a theater of possibility. And as the alien population watched the enormous ships gliding across their skies, they realized something profound: the unknown, the terrifying, the incomprehensible had arrived, and it was on their side. For the first time in weeks, months, or perhaps even years, the alien civilization could breathe a little easier. Hope had arrived, wrapped in metal and fire, in the form of the Deathworlders' fleet. The city lights shimmered brighter, the people smiled more freely, and the scientists and soldiers worked with renewed energy. They had survived the long wait, and now, for the first time, they could believe that survival was only the beginning. A new chapter in their history was about to unfold, one where fear was met with strength, and desperation met with unstoppable power. And in that moment, the aliens knew one undeniable truth: when you call for help in the darkest hour, sometimes the answer comes in forms you could never imagine, terrifying, overwhelming, yet utterly necessary. The Deathworlders had come, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The warlord species had been advancing relentlessly toward the alien planets, confident that victory was already theirs. Their scouts reported what they assumed were minor obstacles: a handful of defensive ships here and there, some energy shields that could be bypassed, and colonies that, while technologically advanced, lacked the experience of true combat. The aliens' distress signal had likely gone unanswered, the invaders assumed. They believed they were walking into an easy conquest, a chance to seize resources, slave populations, and demonstrate their dominance across another part of the galaxy. They were wrong. As the first wave of enemy ships entered the outer planetary system, the Deathworlders were already in position. The aliens had observed their new allies moving with precision. But even now, the sheer scale of their operation was staggering. Massive battlecruisers hovered like dark moons. Smaller strike craft darted between them, and invisible shields hummed with energy across the fleet. The aliens had spent weeks preparing for a defensive engagement, but nothing they had imagined could compare to what was about to unfold. The first shots fired were unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. The warlord ships, confident and aggressive, moved in formation, launching high-energy projectiles designed to pierce conventional shields. But the Deathworlders anticipated every maneuver. Their defense systems detected the attacks before the enemy even reached full range. Beams of concentrated energy erupted from the human ships, intercepting the projectiles mid-flight and vaporizing them instantly. Smaller, faster human vessels engaged enemy fighters, moving with agility and precision that made the aliens felt a mix of terror and relief. They had called for help, and they were getting it in the most overwhelming and unstoppable way imaginable, even as destruction rained down on the enemy. The Deathworlders showed remarkable restraint. They did not target alien installations. They avoided unnecessary damage to cities or infrastructure. It was clear that their purpose was singular: eliminate the threat, protect the alien civilization, and ensure that the warlord species would never again endanger these worlds. The aliens marveled at the discipline and focus of their saviors. This was not mindless destruction. It was controlled, methodical, and devastating in its effectiveness. The aliens' military advisors, who had feared the warlord threat for months, found themselves learning from the Deathworlders in real time. They observed tactics they had never imagined: how to control engagement zones, how to predict enemy behavior, how to use terrain and orbital positioning to their advantage. The Deathworlders' strike patterns were both brutal and brilliant. They attacked in waves, forcing the enemy into positions where they could be destroyed completely, and then retreated, only to attack again from another angle. Their strategy was fluid, yet disciplined, chaotic, yet precise, and it left the aliens in awe. As the battle intensified, small moments of human ingenuity became visible even to the civilian population. Entire fleets of warlord ships were lured into traps set by subtle energy signatures, decoy formations, and carefully timed feints. Explosions lit up the darkness of space in brilliant flashes, debris spinning outward, as if the very stars themselves were being reshaped by the violence. Yet through it all, not a single human ship had been lost, or at least none that the aliens could detect. It was a display of near-perfect coordination, one that made the aliens begin to understand why the Deathworlders were considered a force. Unmatched across the galaxy, the alien leaders, who had once debated evacuation or surrender, were now fully engaged in coordinating with the humans. Though communication was limited, they did not fully understand the language, the technology, or the tactical reasoning. They could see the results. Orders were given, positions adjusted, and planetary defense grids integrated seamlessly with the human fleet. What had once seemed impossible cooperation between two vastly different species was happening in real time, and the aliens realized that survival was no longer just a hope, but a tangible outcome. Meanwhile, the warlord species began to realize the true scale of the mistake they had made. They had underestimated the aliens, underestimated their will to survive, and most importantly, underestimated the power of the humans they had never expected to encounter. Messages of confusion and panic spread among their ranks. Ship after ship was destroyed, command centers annihilated, and key leaders lost. The Deathworlders did not just destroy their ships, they dismantled their strategy, shattered their morale, and sent a clear message that any further aggression would be met with total annihilation. The aliens could hardly believe the transformation occurring in their galaxy. Just days before, they had been on the brink of despair, facing what seemed like certain destruction. Now, with the Deathworlders in position, the warlords were being routed, their power broken, and their advance halted completely. Entire battle zones were cleared, and in the aftermath, the aliens could see the scale of the fleet's work. The humans had not only defended, they had neutralized the threat entirely, ensuring that these enemy forces would not recover easily as the battle moved closer to the alien homeworlds. The civilian population began to grasp the scale of the human fleet's devotion. The Deathworlders were not just fighters, they were protectors. They moved with purpose, defending every major population center, every critical installation, every vulnerable sector. The aliens began to understand that these humans had survived harsher, deadlier worlds than their own, and that experience had taught them not only how to fight, but how to fight with precision, control, and devastating effectiveness. When the final skirmishes of the initial engagement ended, the aliens took stock of what had just occurred. Entire fleets of warlord ships had been destroyed. Key enemy leaders were eliminated. Planetary systems that had seemed doomed were now intact. And throughout it all, the Deathworlders had sustained minimal damage. Having turned the tide with strategic brilliance, rather than reckless aggression, the aliens felt a combination of relief, awe, and gratitude. They had survived the worst, and they had witnessed power and skill unlike anything in their history. As the aliens began to rebuild and recover from the initial shock of the warlord invasion, one thing became clear: the Deathworlders were more than just allies, they were a force of nature. Their presence had changed the balance of power in the galaxy. The aliens' fear had been replaced with confidence, their desperation with hope. And most importantly, they realized that calling for help, despite all the risks, had been the single smartest decision they could have made. The skies, once filled with panic and dread, were now filled with awe and admiration. Citizens walked among the ruins of the outer colonies, grateful that their homes were spared. Inspired by the bravery and power of the humans who had come to protect them, scientists studied the wreckage of enemy ships, amazed at the precision of the human strikes. Soldiers took notes, learning tactics and strategies they had never thought possible. The entire civilization was changed, not just because they had survived, but because they had seen the scale of what true strength and discipline could achieve. And through it all, the Deathworlders remained enigmatic, relentless, and efficient. They did not celebrate, they did not boast, and they did not linger unnecessarily. Their mission was clear: eliminate the threat, protect the innocent, and leave the galaxy safer than they had found it. The aliens had witnessed devastation and salvation intertwined, and they knew that this was only the beginning of a new era in that moment. As stars burned brightly above the recovering planets and the remnants of the enemy fleet drifted silently through space, the aliens realized something profound. They had called into the void a desperate plea for help, and the response had arrived in the most unimaginable form. The Deathworlders had unleashed their devastating power, and in doing so, they had secured not just the survival of a species, but the hope of an entire civilization. After the devastating battle with the warlord species, the alien civilizations slowly began to understand the true nature of the Deathworlders. At first, the aliens had only seen the fleet in action, its overwhelming firepower, its precise and brutal efficiency, and the way it had protected their cities and planets without hesitation. Fear had dominated their initial reactions, for nothing in their history had prepared them for such a display of power. But as the dust of battle settled, and as the warlords were driven back to the far reaches of space, a different feeling began to emerge: respect. Deep, profound respect for these beings who had come from the harshest corners of the galaxy to defend a species they had never met. The first interactions were cautious. The aliens were still wary, unsure if the Deathworlders were friend or foe. Though the fleet had clearly demonstrated its intent, the aliens had no experience with such beings. Their own history was filled with conflicts, betrayals, and alliances that had always carried strings attached. Here, however, was a force that had intervened decisively, without asking for tribute, without demanding loyalty, without seeking to conquer. Communication was slow at first. The aliens tried to establish contact using their own systems, transmitting messages of gratitude, inquiry, and even questions about the human species. The Deathworlders responded in short, concise bursts, conveying meaning without embellishment. They were not communicators in the way the aliens expected, they were pragmatists. And yet their purpose was clear. They had come to protect, and they had done so without hesitation. As the aliens observed the Deathworlders more closely, they began to notice subtle patterns. These were not reckless warriors. They were highly disciplined, efficient, and methodical. Every move in battle had been calculated, every response measured. Their strategy had not only destroyed the enemy, but it also minimized damage to the planets, cities, and infrastructure. Even more surprising, the humans seemed almost patient. They did not rush into unnecessary attacks. They did not chase personal glory, and they did not flaunt their superiority. Instead, they executed their mission with a quiet intensity that spoke volumes about their experience and training. The alien leaders were particularly fascinated by the humans' sense of organization. Meetings were held aboard their own command ships, where alien commanders studied the fleet's formation patterns, deployment strategies, and even logistical systems. How could such a relatively small number of ships coordinate attacks on a massive enemy fleet and come out unscathed? How could they sustain prolonged operations without visible fatigue or error? Slowly, the aliens began to realize that these humans had been forged in an environment far harsher than any they had ever known. The Deathworlders planet, a death world as it was called in galactic lore, had forced them to evolve, adapt, and survive where failure meant certainty. As communication improved, the aliens began to understand another important aspect of their new allies. The humans did not seek control. Many civilizations in the galaxy, when possessing such overwhelming power, would demand allegiance, offer protection only for payment, or attempt to manipulate the weaker species. Not the Deathworlders. Their intervention was clean and focused, limited strictly to neutralizing the threat. They did not demand political influence, economic gain, or personal loyalty. Their only interest was survival, and the protection of those who had called for help. This was unprecedented in the galaxy, and it left the aliens both awed and deeply grateful. Over time, the aliens and the Deathworlders began to work together in a more coordinated way. While the humans continued their patrols and surveillance of the outer regions to prevent any further attacks, the aliens shared their knowledge of the local systems, cultural practices, and planetary conditions. The humans, in turn, offered tactical advice, demonstrated defensive maneuvers, and taught the aliens how to better fortify their colonies against future threats. It was a slow but steady exchange of knowledge, and it created a bond that went beyond simple alliance. Mutual trust began to grow. The aliens, once fearful and hesitant, started to see the Deathworlders not as terrifying strangers, but as partners who had risked themselves to ensure the survival of an entire civilization. Among the alien population, stories began to circulate about the humans' abilities and their discipline. Citizens recounted tales of ships maneuvering flawlessly, weapons striking with surgical precision, and the way the fleet had moved as a single entity, anticipating enemy movements before they occurred. Children who had once feared the dark skies now looked up with wonder and curiosity, imagining what it must be like to live on a world so harsh and so demanding that its people could become unstoppable warriors. Scholars debated the technology and tactics of the Deathworlders, attempting to understand what made them different, what allowed them to succeed where so many others had failed, despite the obvious differences between the two species. The aliens realized that they had much to learn from the Deathworlders. Their own strategies had been effective in peacetime, but war had exposed weaknesses that could no longer be ignored. The humans' approach to combat, defense, and survival offered a template for resilience. The aliens adopted new training techniques, studied fleet formations, even restructured some of their defense systems based on what they had observed. This was not imitation. It was evolution. The aliens were growing stronger, wiser, and more prepared for the challenges that might arise in the future. At the same time, the Deathworlders' presence had a psychological effect that could not be measured by sensors or reports. The very knowledge that such beings were watching over them instilled a sense of security and confidence among the alien population. People began to rebuild their lives, repair damaged infrastructure, and resume their work with renewed determination. Fear that had once paralyzed them was replaced with purpose. Citizens who had hidden in shelters for days during the initial attacks now walked the streets openly. Knowing that their protectors had the power and skill to keep them safe, the leaders of the alien civilization also began to see the Deathworlders in a different light. They were not just military allies, they were teachers, advisors, and, in some ways, mentors. The humans offered guidance on resource management, threat assessment, and long-term planning for planetary defense. They shared strategies for predicting enemy behavior, fortifying vulnerable locations, and even training new soldiers to survive under extreme conditions. It was an education and survival strategy, discipline that the aliens had never experienced before. Through all of this, respect grew not just for the human strength, but for their character. The aliens observed that the Deathworlders did not exploit their power, did not flaunt their dominance, and did not act out of vanity or pride. Their focus was singular: protect those in need, destroy threats efficiently, and leave only when the mission was complete. This sense of integrity, combined with their overwhelming skill, created a level of admiration that went beyond mere gratitude. The aliens realized that these were not conquerors or mercenaries. They were a species shaped by survival, resilience, and a sense of responsibility that transcended fear and ambition. As the weeks passed, the alliance solidified. Joint training exercises were conducted, combining alien technology and human tactics. Communication protocols improved, allowing for faster coordination during potential threats. The aliens began to feel confident in their own abilities, now enhanced by the lessons learned from their human allies. Trust had been earned through action, through the unwavering commitment of the Deathworlders to protect a civilization that was not their own. By the end of this phase, the aliens had undergone a profound transformation. They had witnessed devastation, experienced fear, and endured uncertainty. But they had also encountered hope, strength, and unwavering support. The Deathworlders had arrived as terrifying unknowns, but they had become protectors, teachers, and allies. A new sense of purpose had taken root in the alien civilization. They no longer saw themselves as helpless victims facing an unstoppable enemy. They were participants in their own defense. Guided by allies whose skill and discipline were unmatched, the bond between the two species was now undeniable. The aliens had learned to respect the humans' methods, to trust their judgment, and to appreciate their unique approach to survival. In turn, the Deathworlders had gained insight into the alien civilization, understanding its culture, its values, and its potential. Together, they had formed a partnership that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. And in that moment, as the alien cities glowed softly under the watchful presence of the Deathworlder fleet, a profound truth became clear. Sometimes, salvation arrives in a form that is frightening, overwhelming, and impossible to predict. The aliens had reached out in desperation, and in response, they had not only been saved, they had been transformed. Mutual respect, trust, and shared purpose had taken root, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again. Asterisk after the threat of the warlord. Species had been neutralized, and the alien civilization had begun to recover. Life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The skies, once filled with the sounds of battle, were now quiet. Save for the hum of energy monitoring systems and the occasional patrol of the Deathworlder fleet, which remained in orbit as a protective presence. The aliens were no longer in immediate danger, yet the impact of the events was far from over. Every corner of their society had been touched by the experience, and the memory of the SOS that had summoned help was now etched into the collective consciousness of their people. The first and most visible change was, in the infrastructure of the alien worlds. Cities that had been damaged in the initial skirmishes were repaired with new designs and improved technology, incorporating some of the lessons learned from observing the Deathworlders. Energy shields were strengthened, emergency evacuation protocols were refined, and planetary defense systems were upgraded with insights drawn from the human fleet's operations. Even the layout of the cities changed subtly. Streets were widened for easier movement of emergency. But the arrival of the Deathworlders had taught them a crucial lesson in moments of true desperation. Calling for help was not a sign of weakness, it was an act of courage. The aliens realized that survival was not only about strength or technology, but about the willingness to take risks, to reach beyond themselves and to trust in the unknown. That lesson reshaped their society, creating a culture that valued courage, foresight, and the acknowledgement that even the strongest civilizations sometimes need allies. The Deathworlders themselves had left a lasting impression beyond their military might. The aliens had observed their discipline, their focus, and their unique approach to both combat and strategy. They had seen how the humans operated as a single, coordinated entity, combining strength, intelligence, and adaptability in a way that had seemed impossible to comprehend at first. Scholars and tacticians studied every detail, from fleet formations to small tactical maneuvers, and integrated these observations into their own strategies. Over time, this knowledge became part of the aliens' military doctrine, ensuring that the legacy of the Deathworlders would continue to influence their civilization for generations. As the weeks and months passed, the SOS that had triggered this intervention became a symbol of both desperation and hope. Children learned the story in schools, and citizens recounted it during festivals and ceremonies. It was a story not of fear, but of survival and resilience. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, action, no matter how uncertain, could bring salvation. Artists, writers, and historians began to document the events in vivid detail, ensuring that future generations would understand the scale of what had occurred. The tale of the SOS and the fleet became a cornerstone of their cultural identity, a story of courage, survival, and the unexpected allies who had arrived at the right moment. Meanwhile, in the wider galaxy, the story of the SOS and the Deathworlders' intervention spread quickly. Other civilizations took note. Learning to critical lessons, never underestimate the resolve of those who survive harsh worlds. And sometimes, The most terrifyingly powerful allies are the ones who arrive in response to desperate pleas for help. The legend of the Deathworlders grew, inspiring both awe and caution. While some feared them, most respected their principles and power, recognizing that when they intervened, it was decisive, focused, and, when necessary, devastating. Despite the awe and legends surrounding the Deathworlders, the aliens also realized the importance of self-reliance. The fleet could not remain in orbit forever. The humans had other worlds to protect, other crises to face. The aliens had to internalize what they had learned, to build resilience, and to ensure that they could survive independently in the future. Programs were established to train soldiers in advanced tactics. Scientists continued to study alien technology alongside Deathworlder strategies, and communities worked together to create emergency networks capable of responding to threats quickly. Survival was no longer left to chance. It was now a combination of knowledge, preparedness, and the memory of what had been achieved with the humans' help. Over time, a subtle but profound transformation occurred in the relationship between the aliens and the Deathworlders. Communication became easier, trust deeper, and mutual respect grew. While the humans were enigmatic, strict, and focused, the aliens came to understand that these traits were part of what made them so effective. The Deathworlders did not act out of vanity, ambition, or greed. They acted with purpose and clarity. The aliens learned that true power was not about domination, but about discipline, foresight, and a willingness to protect those who could not protect themselves. This lesson became embedded in their leadership, education, and culture, influencing the way they approached everything from governance to conflict resolution. As the galaxy slowly returned to a tense but manageable peace, the alien civilization began to thrive again. Trade resumed, research advanced, and planets once threatened by the warlords flourished. Citizens no longer lived in fear, but in vigilance, tempered by knowledge and experience. The SOS that had triggered the arrival of the Deathworlders became a point of pride, a moment when courage, desperation, and faith in the unknown had intersected to save a civilization. It reminded them that even in the face of overwhelming odds, action mattered, hope mattered, and alliances of an unexpected ones could change history. Finally, the departure of the Deathworlders marked the end of this phase, but not the end of their impact. They left behind more than just stories of battle. They left knowledge, strategy, and an example of resilience that the aliens would carry forever. Future generations would grow up knowing that survival was possible, even against threats that seemed insurmountable, and that courage, preparation, and trust in the right allies could turn despair into victory in the end. The SOS had done more than call for help, had changed the course of history. The alien civilization survived, adapted, and grew stronger. They had faced annihilation and been saved by a force beyond their understanding. Their alliance with the Deathworlders became a cornerstone of their identity, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, the universe could respond to courage with power, and that sometimes salvation arrived in the most unexpected, terrifying, and awe-inspiring form. And so, as the alien planets glimmered with renewed life, their skies free from warships and destruction, the memory of the SOS endured. It became a symbol, a legend, and a lesson for all who would come after. When you reach out in desperation, when you summon help with courage and clarity, sometimes the response is more than survival. It is a chance to be transformed, to grow stronger, and to witness the power of allies beyond imagination. The galaxy would never forget the day the SOS brought the Deathworlders' devastating fleet, and the alien civilization would carry that legacy forever, wiser, braver, and forever changed.